Welcome to another edition of the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Hope you're all doing very well. Another great guest tonight. Claudia Aguirre is here. She is the president and CEO of Baker Ripley. Claudia, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Dr. Sanborn, for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those who don't know, you're probably still doing this, right? Baker Ripley used to be neighborhood centers,
That's
right?
right. That's
so how's
right.
that transition coming, by the way?
It's coming right very nicely.
Yeah.
Once we convince people we're not a law firm,
Baker
that's
Ripley.
right. Associated with the same family, but the transition has happened very nice.
Well, listen, I've been very excited to have you because you're running this large nonprofit here in town. Are you guys the largest sort of social service nonprofit in our city?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, that's really nice, right?
That's right, and in Texas.
Yeah, in all of Texas.
In all of Texas. That's correct.
Wow. And how does it? Do you know the ranking? Like, is it City Square is number 2 up in Dallas, or do you know what that is?
No.
Because that'd be an interesting thing.
Yeah.
I should know that too. Actually, I should know that as well.
I've been told it's top 1% in the country, largest in Houston, this region in Texas, the largest community development organization.
Wow. Yeah.
So.
And you guys do wonderful work. So I'll start with my usual first question. Claudia, you're writing the Aguirre book on leadership. What are some of the chapters in your book on leadership?
Oh, God, I love that question. So I think the book will actually be like an almanac if ever I get done with it. But so a couple of chapters. I think one would be titled Figure It Out Leadership. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's one of the things that we at Baker Ripley say when we're hiring someone. Do you want, if you look at the person you're hiring, is that the person when all goes down and the storm has hit, is that the person you want sitting next to you? And so what we consider figure it out leadership is a person who is not constrained by a job description, not constrained by a role, and is really looking at, here's the landscape of my job, and here's what we need to get done. How do we get it done? And you just figure it out, right? There's no asking for permission. There's no asking for clarity on what the steps will be. That's a leader. Right?
It's sort of like Tim Gunn, just sort of make it work, right?
Make it work. Figure it out.
Yeah.
My second chapter, the title would be, and this would be really great for your students, would be The Generational Spark. I find, and we all know, that in every generation, leaders emerge, right? Depending on what the issue is. The civil rights movement, every kind of movement required somebody to get excited about it and make the movement. So this chapter would be around what issues does your generation have to solve? Mm-hmm. And are you the one that will emerge? Mm-hmm. Because those successful leaders that have emerged have asked 2 questions. If not me, then who? Yeah. And if not now, then when? Mm-hmm. So it's all about figuring out how your generation will spark that new leader.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And one of the other chapters that I actually, we were talking about this earlier, is leaders create leaders. So on 2 fronts, if you're a leader already, then it's your responsibility to make sure that the people looking at you and following you are doing so at the best that you can offer. Mm-hmm. But most importantly, for those who want to be leaders, it's really important to figure out who you want to work for. Yeah. Many times we think we want to take a job and this is what we need to do and this is where we want to go without even considering who the leader is. Mm-hmm. The leader is who makes you. Yeah. And, I've been very fortunate through my career that I've had great mentors, great bosses. So I would say watch out who you work for. Make sure that the person you work for is at least depicting the kind of leader you want to be. Yeah,
that's so important, right? I mean, I think many times we don't think about that when we choose a job. And when we choose a job that has a great leader, we learn from that person, yet we're not thinking about that in terms of the job choice. who is my leader going to be? Who's my boss going to be?
That's right. That's right. And really, it is your leadership skill set, right? Not a content expertise, not anything. It is your leadership skill set that will keep advancing you.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and so if you're learning from a leader that you really admire and you really want to be like, you're going to get there much faster.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be the leader you want to be.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you, one of the reasons I was excited to see you today, I've done a lot of these leadership classes where we travel around the state with students, and we've been in the Valley, in Dallas, San Antonio. And in the Valley, we met a lot of leaders that were sort of old Latino guys, like old patrons, you know, they were there, and they sort of had an old way of thinking, a way that you and I would not have, right? In Dallas, there were practically no Latino leaders, right? In San Antonio, you had Latino leaders, but in Houston, we have a few, but still in the state of Texas, as you look at it as a whole, we don't really have enough Latino leaders that are a reflection of our population. Do you see that changing? And what's going on there?
You know, fortunately, it's changing.
Yeah, I do
But
think
it's
so.
changing slowly.
Yeah.
It is changing slowly. And I hold the Latino community responsible for this. The community leaders that should really be bringing up the next generation. You see it in a lot of other ethnic groups about how important it is to bring up the next leader. And here in Houston, when I got here in Houston, I saw that. There was a very tight-knit group of politicos, Latino leaders that were, you know, the godfathers and the godmothers, and it was like, you have to ask for permission to be part of this dynamic. That doesn't exist to that degree anymore.
There was a political machine.
It was a political, and it's a lot more broad now, especially because we've moved more from a Mexican American Latino cohort to a much broader, as you can see from our county judge and some of the elected, newly elected, that you're seeing the Colombian, the Honduran, and other Latino populations. But with that diversity comes nobody's coaching us, nobody's mentoring us to say, when you get up there, you got to bring somebody with you.
Yeah.
And whether we got there from opportunity or a mentor, again, I was very fortunate to have some great mentors. Of all my mentors, only one was Latino. And so we have this responsibility that we have to pause and say, who do we want to bring along with us once you make it?
Yeah. And when we look at race, I find African Americans do an excellent job sort of bringing up the next group, mentoring. You know, I've seen this a lot of times. I'm the mentor to a lot of young African Americans who actually ask me to be their mentor, but you don't see as much of it in the Latino community. It's not as...
No, and much less with Latina.
Yeah.
Right? Much less with the women.
Yeah.
And when I talk to Latina women and younger girls, I say, get yourself a mentor. You know, and most of the time, it doesn't even have to be someone that looks like you. Right. It would be worthwhile and it'd be great, but you don't have to. We have not been schooled as Latinas to reach out and ask for help. We have not been taught how to ask for a mentor. We are taught to go this way and do something this way, and there's no huge population of Latinas who have made it big enough for us to see their path. And so with such limited pathways, we just don't do it.
Yeah,
we don't do it.
Let's talk about your background, Claudia.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Juarez, Chihuahua, Mexico. We were a family living middle class in Mexico. Pretty good upbringing until the economy fell. in Mexico. And so we had to make a choice, a decision that so many families, right, immigrant families have to make. And we came via El Paso. My parents didn't know any English, so it was very difficult for them to get a job. My dad was
How
president.
old were you at that point?
I
when
was
you crossed
12.
over? 12.
I was
Wow.
12. No English either.
Yeah.
I was placed in a special education class because at that time there was no bilingual or ESL education. My father was a vice president of the bank in Mexico and ends up in El Paso selling door-to-door vacuum cleaners.
Wow.
And so, which I have to say that whenever somebody comes to sell something, I buy. If you knock on my door, I buy.
It's a tribute to your dad.
That's right.
Yeah.
And after graduating high school, I went to college in Austin, studied political science. I thought, Dr. Sanborn, I was going to go into politics, right?
Yeah.
That was my role. I thought I was going to go to law school, go into politics. I started working for Bob Lanier, recently elected in the 90s. And,
Former mayor of Houston.
Former mayor of Houston.
Yep.
And one day he couldn't make, the school district had asked him to come and speak to a group of kids who had been dropouts, and he couldn't make it, so I went for him. That was the road that started, that opened up for me. I started falling in love with schools and education. I started going more and more to kids. So I left that life, went into the alternative certification program, became a teacher, became a high school principal, assistant superintendent. And
that was in Houston? That
was in Houston
where
for
were you
HISD.
principal? Which high school were you principal?
So I was the high school principal for an alternative school which had all 16 campuses. So once if they were dropping out of one of our high schools, they went into one of my alternative schools. So we had 16 campuses in HISD. One day I got a call from Bill White's office, who was mayor, who had just been elected mayor, and said, I heard that you used to work in this office. We need somebody with your skills. Will you come? And I said, absolutely. So I decided to go work for Bill White. Then Katrina happened.
Yeah.
And we started welcoming, all of our neighbors from Louisiana. And I met the folks from neighborhood centers, Baker Ripley, then neighborhood centers, and just fell in love again with the organization. And the belief that they have. And so I went to go work for Baker Ripley, and I've been there for 8 years. And just this year became the president and CEO.
Wow. How has that transition been for you to, you've always been a leader, right? But you've never been the leader, and then now you have become a leader. What have been the hard things about that, the difficult challenges?
Yeah, so I would even say that's even one of the chapters that might be like the ending chapter of my book. It was difficult because you go from a colleague to the boss, right? So it wasn't even, the difficulty wasn't even going to become the boss. It was that you'd been seen as an expert in one place, and you were a colleague to most of the executives. And then you're thrusted into the CEO position, and now you have to reassess your relationships with the executives. People you spent your 8 years with, right? That your working relationships. I am a very collaborative.
You were just a buddy, and now you're the boss.
And it was very collaborative leadership. And now it's a matter of how do you transition from a collaborative to a much more directive. Somebody coming in new can actually tell their own story of what kind of leader they want to be. Because I've been there for 8 years, they knew what kind of leader I was. They knew my deficits, they knew my deficiencies, they knew my weak spots, they knew what I could do. So that would be probably the biggest challenge, is that the staff, the leaders, knew me as one person, as an individual that does this. And so you could see folks were like, can she do it? Can she really lead this? Yes, she's great in operations, but can she lead this? So I've spent the last year really working on making sure that people understand that the role I play now is exactly the role I've played in every leadership, which is you got to stand up and you got to step up to meet that role.
Has it been difficult when you know, when we're in organizations, we all know our weaknesses. We know the weaknesses. And here you weren't the CEO, but you could see some of the weaknesses. And then as you take over, you want to change those. Is that a challenge sometimes when thinking, well, this person isn't as strong as they probably should be, or we're going to have to change this wholesale because it's not as strong, or, you know, is that a tough part?
Yeah. So, you know, as your textbook that you're looking at, and the whole bus,
right people on the
right
bus.
people on the bus, I would say that that was one of probably my biggest mistakes, is keeping someone on too long.
Oh, wow.
You think they're going to get better, and
you want to be nice,
and you
too.
want to be nice,
Yeah.
but you know, you also don't realize how everyone else is looking at you, right? And as the leader, how you respond to those challenges is how people will begin to associate you with capacity and leadership. And so it started affecting the leadership. I mean, when you have one person that really doesn't belong in this team, and you're allowing it, and everybody around you knows that you know that they don't belong. You know, it's one thing to, everybody thinks, oh, she doesn't belong, but they know, I know, that she doesn't belong. So the fortunate thing is, being there for 8 years, you kind of know where some of the weaknesses and where some of the tweaks had to be in, which was really kind of awakening for, like, when the board asked me, you know, what would you do different? Because that's always what people want to ask, right?
Yeah, that's right.
When you precede a leader that's been there for 30 years, people want to know, what do you want to do different, right? What kind of leader will you be that's different? And so it was really difficult to tell the story about what I want to do different when I'd been part of the leadership and the decisions for so long. But now it's kind of falling all into place, where you see the tweaks. Benefit is you can make them sooner. The disadvantage is you got to get the relationship with the staff, in the CEO staff dynamic, before you can make those tweaks.
Wow. Talk about your board, right? Because so many times a board is a reflection of the CEO, right? And so as a new CEO, you come in and you have a board that's maybe a reflection of a previous CEO. Not to say they're not professional and they know they have a job to do as a board. They're volunteers, but still they know that they have a job to do. And you have an extraordinary board at Baker Ripley. But talk about that board and the dynamic there for you.
Yes. So one of the best advice that I received from a colleague was, recruit board members who you want to work for. If you were to work for them in their business, would that be someone, right? Because in essence, they're your boss.
Right.
And so it tends to be easy, especially for someone like me that was very operational and really working in the community initiatives, to step back and say, no, now as CEO, one of the major top 3 roles is really the relationship with my boss, which is the board. And sometimes as leaders, we don't associate the relationship between leader and board as what you would as with you and your boss. And so I've had to step back and say, okay, I need to let go of some of these areas and start to really look at the board. The board has given me quite a bit of freedom to come back and talk about some of the changes that we want to do.
That's a mark of a good board, though.
It's a remarkable board, and a board that has realized that we need to start becoming more reflective of the community. We need to diversify. We really need to see. Our board has historically been a very working board, right? But it's also been a very powerful board, and now we just have to stand behind what we say, which is the leaders of our communities are already here. We just need to invest in them. So there's leaders in every community, in every ethnic, in every community. So my job now is to go find those leaders so that they could be part of the board. Because if they don't have a pathway into our board, if it's the same board members recruiting in their same circle, then your board's going to look the same.
No, that's right. If you have a bunch of old white guys on your board, they're going to recruit old white guys. Yeah.
And so you have to be very purposeful.
Yeah.
And you have to have that hard conversation. I've been fortunate that the majority of them were like, of course, that makes sense, right? We want to diversify, right? We want to do it. But you have to be able to stand up and say, we need some, we need a little bit of color here. We need a little bit of females. We need a little bit of different industry. Especially, as you know, with nonprofits, board members tend to be representatives of funding sources, lawyers, people that have some time, right? And so one of the big strategic moves is to really look at what are we wanting to do? What's our strategic issue, right? If small businesses is really where we want to put some resources in, then who do we need to recruit on our board that can help us in that industry? So being very purposeful about what kind of board member expertise and skill set we want to recruit.
Wow. So let's go to the Twitterverse and see what people are saying on Twitter, because students are tweeting in as we speak. So Sarah Deli wants to know, what are some ways, talk about your 30, 60, 90 days, your first little portion as a CEO. How did you sort of solidify your leadership? How did you demonstrate to those colleagues of yours that you were the leader?
Yeah, so we have to remember that Baker Ripley was just coming out of the energy shelter where we had spent, months in it. So when I took over, we had staff who were exhausted from just a 24/7. Right after Hurricane Harvey, I became the leader in January. And so the first thing that I told everybody, all of the staff, was, I'm going to get out there and talk to you, meet with you. I've got a set of questions that I want to ask, depending on your role, that I want you to be honest with me. I want you to tell us what you're thinking. So for the first 4 months, that's all I did when it came to the staff. Went out to we had 60 locations. And so went out, talked to the staff, asked the questions, reassured them of my desire and my strategy. But in terms of like the leadership, how did I really solidify my role? With the majority of them, it just took one-on-one conversation. There was a couple times that I just had to say, no, this is what is going to happen. Yep. And as we were talking about Latinas earlier, another best advice that I've been given, especially from a Latina to a Latina woman, is stop speaking with emotions, especially when you're trying to get people to see you as the leader. Your public servant, your servitude will show eventually, but at some point when you're trying to show that you're the leader, shorter sentences, fewer words, statements.
Wow.
And so,
That's interesting, yeah.
At night I would be like, okay, fewer sentences, fewer. And so when I go in, because my tendency as a leader is to bring people along, like, don't you think this is a great idea? Let's do it, let's do it. And it's worked for me.
Yeah.
But now in a different role, I had to show them the strength and the leadership, and so I had to force myself to ignite the directiveness that doesn't come easily to me.
Wow, that's interesting, yeah. Abby Tempest wants to know, at what point in your career at Baker Ripley did you feel like, oh, I could be the CEO, maybe that should be my next step?
Probably when I took the job.
Yeah. So you weren't sure all the way up.
Yeah.
Wow.
When there was time to say, and as a matter of fact, I had the previous CEO continuously talk to me, and again, it's a female thing, it's a Latin. I don't know what you want to put it under, but it was this doubt. I've read somewhere where it said, women have to believe and feel like they're 100% qualified in order to even attempt to do something. Men, as long as they think they're 50% qualified and they think they're 100% qualified, right?
It's amazing.
It's not a gender bash. It's just
the reality, right?
It's how I see many of us women, so that we have to be so sure of ourselves. So probably not till I took the job.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's sort of amazing though, right?
Yeah. I've always been in love with Baker Ripley, and always knew that I was a leader, but the leader was scary.
Mm-hmm. This morning I was at a thing where Dan Pallotta was speaking live, and Dan Pallotta he's the guy who talks about overhead costs. He talks about the idea that we're maybe not paying our nonprofit CEOs enough. How we need to spend more money on fundraising, even though we're spending higher percentage, we make more money. When you look at sort of fundraising as a leader, do you try to go by it's going to do, we're going to spend 5% and hope for a big return, or what is sort of the leadership directive that you look at in terms of fundraising?
So one of the things that we think at Baker Ripley, and I came in telling folks, is that just because we serve poor people doesn't mean we have to have poor infrastructure.
Yeah.
Right? And in order to have a strong infrastructure, you've got to invest. And money is one of those things, right? That's what is going to attract your best talent. When it comes to the fundraising portion of it, is really developing a matrix around what's the cost benefit. We were always seeing dollar in and dollar out without really realizing the benefit to our reputation, our name. If there's opportunity to increase the name recognition, opportunity to do some brand development, some opportunities to bring in future leaders or volunteers, then it's worth investing in that particular project. Yeah. We're fortunate here, I think, in Houston, that the philanthropic community is a very giving community. And we haven't, for the most part, haven't been challenged in saying you spend too much on the overhead.
Right, we aren't.
Right?
I see that in other communities, not so much here,
And so, because I think people, especially in Houston, right? And we were talking about Dallas and San Antonio. Dallas, where, you have to have a name recognition.
Right.
San Antonio is like, whoa, all over the place. Houston is such an entrepreneurial city. Yep. And so we're fortunate that when you ask for help and philanthropic dollars or private resources, most likely you're asking somebody who's made money, lost it, made it again, right? So they understand the investment to talent and infrastructure. But then that keeps us really on our toes about ensuring that the messaging and the story that we do for fundraising is solid around what is the benefit for the community at the end.
Yeah, that's very good. Kamaria Swan wants to know about culture. How important is culture for you as a leader? And when you look at the culture of Baker Ripley, is it the culture that you want, or what would you like to see it as?
So that's one of the things that I fell in love with Baker Ripley, was the culture. I would say that the majority of our 1,600 staff have the same belief. And we have what is called TAG, where when you come in to interview, you're not interviewing specifically for a job, right? It's a culture fit assessment. And we have the best of the best leaders, and they're not managers. They're not leaders by title, but leaders from all over the agency that actually have to interview you. And they're not interviewing you for content or experience or anything. It's just culture fit.
Wow.
And it goes back to the question, if we're at NRG having to run a shelter for displaced people, who do you want next to you? And that's the culture that Baker Ripley has, and I enjoy that that culture. And to maintain that culture means that we're constantly having to, this business, there's a turnover rate in several areas, and so constantly having to hire and show people what culture looks like here, because it's all around. We have to show them.
Yeah, you have a nice onboarding process for that.
We have such a nice onboarding process.
That's so many people forget that part, don't they?
Yes.
It's amazing. Okay, let me find another question here. This is a good one. How do you deal with competition internally for leadership roles, positions? So people that are already working there, and then a position comes open. How do you deal with some of that?
Interesting. Especially for an organization like Baker Ripley, which is pretty flat in its leadership. So, and when folks don't leave those spots, the few that are available are coveted, right? They're like, wow, this is a great opportunity. I like to, and it's been one of our goals, is to hire from within, right? We want to grow our leaders, and we want to make sure that they have first choice. So what we have developed is a matrix that isn't just to show you how you can go up. I mean, if there's only two positions above you, and those two are going nowhere, then you have nowhere to go. And so we've developed where you can actually start to see across the agency leadership opportunities. But again, what that creates is lots of folks wanting the same position. One of the best things that we saw recently is the what we call like on-the-job training. We gave each one of them a scenario that the position would be, and we had staff from all over the agency be the judges. And so the agency leadership chose who it was. And we've done that 3 times, and it's worked beautifully.
Wow. Wow, that's interesting. And Nakia wants to know, what motivates you every day? I mean, what is it, you get up out of bed, what's your big motivator?
That Houston remains a place of opportunity for all who are willing to work hard and pull themselves up. So I go to sleep and I wake up scared and fearful that there's one person still out there that is not on the bus, either through our communities or stuff. So what motivates me and what gets me up is the opportunity to leverage one more dollar, to be able to start one more program, to be able to do one more partnership that will allow us access to services, so that community member that is still left without much opportunity gets that opportunity.
When we look at the data of around Houston, around Texas, around the people that we serve, Claudia, the data doesn't always look good, right? I mean, things aren't necessarily getting better. Does that ever get to you? Does that ever, why aren't we so optimistic? Because if we look at the data, it seems like it would be hard to be optimistic.
And
yet, we see nonprofit leaders all over our community that are optimistic, but the data doesn't show that.
And I'm angry with the data. I'm so angry. From our early childhood to our adults. We were just talking earlier today, in some of my communities, 1, 2, 3 out of 4 older students over the age of 18 do not have a high school diploma or GED. So we have put a ceiling over so many in this region. And then we have 70,000 jobs unfilled. And we're recruiting people from all over the place to fill these jobs, right? So I'm optimistic that we can do one more step towards, which I believe the answer is coordinate and weave and thread the assets that everybody has in the private, public, and nonprofit arena. But the data, and in some cases, the data just keeps getting worse.
Yeah.
And so we know people are doing better. We know organizations are helping more. And you know, I don't think it's going to change. I think even in some of these dismal data, we're going to see a little bit more of that before it starts to get better.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mia J wants to know, if we were to ask some of your staff, what are the best leadership qualities about Claudia? What would they say?
I truly care about staff's work, load, family, life. And I want to make sure that when staff come in, that they are happy with what they're doing, because a happy staff really is a more fulfilled staff, and it actually does more for the organization. I would say that they would say she works us hard. She is always looking at what's next, sometimes to the frustration of some. You know, some will say, whoa, you know, Claudia, let us catch up. But I think at the end, and my record will show that the majority of my staff right now, even in previous, have stayed with me for years. And so because the last thing that they would say is, Claudia's not going to ask us to do anything that she wouldn't do herself. So I'm not going to ask you to be there at 8 p.m. if I'm not there. I'm not going to ask you to run NRG if I'm not sleeping there. And so I'm there with you.
I think maybe it was last year, I had Brian Green, and he and I were talking from the food bank, Houston Food Bank. And one of the questions he asked me was, he said, Bob, if you could be a nonprofit leader or a leader anywhere else, what else could you? And you know,
oh, wow.
One of the things I said was, well, you know, maybe running the Children's Museum or a Children's Museum. I mean, that might be something interesting. Maybe an art museum. These are just things that I've thought of. The zoo, I think that could be sort of fun. Do you ever think things like that? What else could be interesting for you to be a leader of?
Yeah, a university.
Yeah.
I think that you know, I would think of the medical center or something like that, but you know, I'm squeamish about any even conversation about health stuff. But I think the universities are evolving to be very much more inclusive, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And you love education. We've talked about this before. You love this whole idea of education.
That's right. It's the ticket.
Yeah.
Out of any place, and it's your, you know, I say we're all born with skills and assets. The difference is the opportunity given. So
there are
education's
too many young people in Texas are not given the opportunities they need or deserve, right? Yeah. Okay, a couple fun questions now, Claudia, as we wind up.
Fun.
Your favorite restaurant in Houston?
My staff make fun of me of this. It's actually a taco stand, and I get the best elote, corn. You know, staff will tell you at least 2 or 3 times a week.
Where's your taco? What's the name of your taco?
It's in the East End. It's Tampico.
Oh, Tampico.
Yes.
And they have good elote?
They have the best elote. So, you know, I have friends who say they're foodies, and I think that's kind of cool, but no, I am not one of those. You know, I'm Mexican. I like my Mexican food, and
there are Mexican foodies.
Well, I get that, but I like my, you know, my tacos just, you know, ready to go.
Well, you know, tacos is like one of the great inventions of humankind, though, right? I mean, you have to admit. You know, I always think it's funny that when you bring someone from the north and they have a breakfast taco and they think, why aren't I eating this?
No, that's right.
And my response is, I don't know. Why aren't you eating this?
That's right. That's right. And you can just put anything in it and make it a taco now.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So,
Yeah.
how about talk about work-life balance for you? What does that look like?
It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible. But I will say that it wasn't a product of this position. It has been a consistent battle with me. I have been challenged throughout my career with the work-life balance. And so now I've just come to realize and accept that I have renamed work-life balance to work-life flexibility, and allow myself the flexibility on both sides to let one rule my world at a particular time and let the other kind of be on standby, and then vice versa. Because I was creating a monster, and my children would say that. I was creating a monster when I kept thinking, okay, I'm going to only do this amount here. And you hear people say that, you know, oh, I wake up and I only do emails here, and that works for them.
Yeah.
But it wasn't working for me. And so I now just am okay with saying I have to accept it. It's very little balance, but a lot of flexibility.
Morning person or evening person?
Evening.
Evening. Do you do a lot of work in the evening?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
People will tell you it's 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'm still emailing and texting and doing work. I don't do a good job of sleeping, and you know, and I have to do better with that. Again, not because of this position, it's just how I've been.
Yeah.
But I'm such a night person.
Wow. Favorite TV show that you've been binge watching or have in the last year or so?
Folks will laugh. I watch so much TV.
Yeah?
I watch so much TV, but one in particular is it's a novela series in Spanish, and it's on Netflix actually, and it's called Velvet. That's
supposed to be pretty good, though.
It's so awesome, and it actually helps me with the Spanish. You know, I want to make sure that I'm keeping up with it. But really, I watch a lot of TV, and I also say that I have it for the background noise.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know.
And then finally, when Hollywood decides to make the Claudia Aguirre story, who's going to play you in Hollywood?
Oh my God, I thought J-Lo.
Oh, wow. Boricua.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
The other Mexican. If she could do Selena's,
That's right.
she could do Claudia Aguirre.
Yeah, she absolutely could. Claudia, thank you so much for what you do, and thanks for being here.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Hey, that's it for the Nonprofit Leadership Studio. Thank you guys very much for being here. Keep up the great work. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much.